Hello and welcome to Art Masters with me, Mrs. Portilla. Today we are going to be learning about a Series 1 artist for Art Masters. We're going to learn a little bit of history about this artist. We're going to see some slides of their work, and we're going to see a little glimpse of what this month's art project will be. Today you will meet one of the most celebrated artists of all time, Vincent van Gogh. What makes him a master artist? Some say it's his use of texture. Others say it's his use of color. Still others say it was his fascinating life. We will look at his art, learn a bit about his life, and try to determine why Vincent van Gogh is one of the most celebrated artists of the world. This is Vincent van Gogh. During his lifetime, many considered him to be a failure. In his 37 years of life, he tried to be an art dealer, and he was fired. He tried to teach, but he lost his job. He tried to be a minister, preaching to those in need for free, but no one wanted to hear what he had to say. He didn't even begin painting until he was 29 years old. He sold only a handful of drawings in his entire lifetime, and his art was sometimes made fun of. He died in poverty, leaving behind over 1,700 works of art. Today, we consider Vincent van Gogh to be one of the greatest artists in history of art. University students can spend years studying his paintings, drawings, and letters. The Getty Museum paid nearly $54 million for one of his iris paintings, and Tokyo Gallery bought a painting of Vincent's doctor for more than $82 million. He wanted to capture something special about each person he painted. He wanted to capture that special something that makes a person memorable throughout time. He had grand ideas about painting. Let's see if this is true about his next portrait. What makes this self-portrait look ghostly? The blue in the background is also in his face, especially in his eyes and his beard, and in his jacket. This makes him seem somewhat transparent or see-through. We can see that he's showing us he's an artist by holding his palette, his canvas, and his brushes. He was born March 30th in 1853 in the Netherlands. He was the oldest of 5 children, and he was named for an uncle who was an art dealer. Vincent joined his uncle when he was older as a clerk for the gallery. At first he did well, so well in fact that he was promoted and sent to the London branch of the firm. Once there, he fell in love. Unfortunately, the young lady was in love with somebody else. Unable to deal with the rejection, Vincent fell into a depression that eventually cost him his job. After he lost his job, he turned to teaching among the poor in a British community. Unable to keep that position, Vincent returned to Holland, where he failed in his attempt to become a minister. Since he could not be a minister, he decided to try preaching in a Belgian coal mining town. Again, he failed. In 1881, he returned home, and it was only then that he began to draw. He loved painting with oil, and within a year, he had decided to become a painter. Let's see one of his first drawings. Do you ever get frustrated when you try to draw something for the first time and it just doesn't look right? Van Gogh and other famous artists have had the same problem. A very talented artist doesn't usually just sit down and complete a masterpiece on his first try. They probably make many sketches. And here are some sketches by Van Gogh when he was preparing to paint figures of people. He studied them and sketched them for one whole winter. Can you tell what kind of hands these are? Are they manicured royalty hands? No, they're rough and callous. These are hard-working people. Now let's see what the finished painting, for which he sketched all those hands. Do you think Van Gogh sketched and studied more than just hands for this painting? Yes, he definitely did. The title, Potato Eaters. What kind of life do you think the people in this painting had? It looks like they had a hard life. They were peasants and farmers who worked the land. What feature of the people did Van Gogh exaggerate or make larger? Think about the sketch we just saw. The hands. Why? To get our attention. He wanted us to see that the hands of the people eating the potatoes were the same hands that dug them up from the field. They're hard workers. Why do you think Van Gogh used such dark, earthy colors like browns? To match the earth the farmers worked and to set a drab, dreary mood. The family in this painting was so poor they had only a few potatoes to eat for dinner. They looked tired and not very happy. If he had used all bright colors, would the feeling or mood of the picture be the same? No, it would be cheerful and exciting. He used color to express emotion or mood in the painting. If you look closely at the faces of the people, they kind of look like they're carved out of wood. Van Gogh used this technique to show that a rough, rugged life that they led. Van Gogh kept using dark colors until he discovered some very colorful Japanese artwork. He loved the bright colors and the strong lines he saw. Soon, Van Gogh's paintings started to look much more colorful. This Van Gogh portrait of Pierre Tanguy, he was one of Van Gogh's few friends. He was important, not just because of his friendship, but because of what he did for a living. He owned an art supply shop that was also a meeting place for local artists. If they could not afford paint, or if they were broke, he would take paintings in exchange for more art supplies. Van Gogh painted him twice. What do you see in the background of the painting? Pictures from Asia. He loved the art of Asia. He collected prints of Japanese artists whose work had been seen for the first time in Europe. Van Gogh also loved these prints, and here he has copied some of them to form a background for his picture. Asian art fascinated Van Gogh, and he used some of the techniques in his own work. What separates the background from the foreground? A red outline. In this painting, Van Gogh uses an Asian trick of outlining in red. The thin red line separates the foreground from the background. Remember to try this sometime when you are making a picture and you want to separate objects and make them stand out. As much as Van Gogh liked painting portraits, it was hard to find people to pose for him. Without funds, he couldn't hire models, so he often painted still life subjects. Do you guys remember what a still life is? It's a painting of things that do not move, like we did for Cézanne. The next painting is one of many still lifes that Van Gogh made while living in the south of France. In these sunflowers, we could see a lot of different textures shown. We could see thick brush strokes on the flowers. We could see smooth paint on the vase. How would the flowers feel if you could touch them? Bushy, fuzzy, maybe a little rough? We could tell the texture without even touching them. Did Van Gogh use his outlining trick in this painting? Yes, he did, around the vase. There's an interesting story about why Van Gogh painted so many sunflower canvases. It was while living in the south of France that Van Gogh hoped to achieve his dream. He wanted to create an artist colony, a place where all would be welcome to paint, to learn and to live without concern for money or outside pressure. He tried very hard to get as many artists as he could to join him, but only one came. It was Paul Gauguin. When Van Gogh found out that Gauguin was coming, he was very excited. He cleaned up his little yellow house. He bought some furniture to make it more comfortable. He couldn't afford fresh flowers, so he painted a vase of bright yellow sunflowers for every room. Van Gogh loved the way yellow made him feel bright and cheery, and he wanted other people to feel that way too. So he uses lots of yellow in his paintings, just like this next sunflower painting. Unfortunately, all of Van Gogh's beautiful paintings weren't enough to make Gauguin's stay a happy one. When he finally arrived by train, both men were looking forward to working in peace and harmony. This was not to be. Gauguin didn't seem to like anything Van Gogh did. They argued a lot. Within days of his arrival, Gauguin had taken over running of the house. Van Gogh was a sloppy housekeeper, so Gauguin had the house cleaned. He also set up a budget, and he took over the cooking because he said Van Gogh was a terrible cook. He was also very critical of Van Gogh's painting style, and his comments caused an already insecure Vincent a great deal of pain. As the days passed, the two men argued more and more. Van Gogh was afraid things were not working out. He wanted Gauguin to stay. He did not want to abandon his dream of artists painting together in harmony. This next work of art is one he painted in early December to let Gauguin know how he would feel if his friend were to leave. The empty chair gives the feeling of loneliness. Van Gogh did not want to be alone again. He painted Gauguin's chair and put welcoming lights behind and on it. However, nothing could heal the problems that existed between the two artists. Things just got worse. Van Gogh had always had problems during his life with the way he felt. Sometimes he would get so angry and upset that no one could make him feel better. This time he became so angry and upset that he used his shaving razor to cut off part of his ear. After that, Gauguin sent a telegram to Theo informing him that his brother was dying. Gauguin left shortly thereafter, never talking to or communicating with Van Gogh again. When his brother arrived, he found Vincent weak from losing blood, but the doctor said that he would recover. Theo realized that his brother needed help, and Vincent was sent to a local hospital where he spent the next week. Upon release from the hospital, Van Gogh painted his next self-portrait. Van Gogh painted this self-portrait in his bedroom. He is looking into a mirror that hung beside the window you can see on the right. Can you see the easel with the canvas in the background on the left? Van Gogh included that to show that he had recovered and was painting again. But this is not a portrait of Van Gogh, but rather a portrait of Van Gogh's reflection in the mirror. We know this because his right ear appears to be bandaged, but in fact, it was the left ear that was injured. This event, more than any other in Van Gogh's life, caused him to become a mysterious and legendary painter. In May of 1889, less than 6 months after the incident with Gogh, Van Gogh committed himself to a mental hospital in the south of France. At first, Van Gogh did well responding to the structured rules. He painted some of his most important paintings while there, including his most famous work, The Starry Night. Now we're seeing a nighttime full of stars. Is it a peaceful, quiet night? Well, the swirling stars and moving, exploding around us makes it seem like it's not a peaceful, quiet night. Look at the brushstrokes in the painting. Vincent seemed to always be in a hurry. He wasn't interested in putting down thin layers of color. He applied his paint, sometimes straight from the tube, and moved it with a palette knife and sometimes a brush. You could see each bold brushstroke. Notice the swirling, spiraling lines of colors around the stars. You will have a chance to try this in your art activity. Notice how Van Gogh shows the use of the path those stars take through the sky. Astronomers have determined that the path Van Gogh's stars take is indeed the actual path the stars would have followed. Now that we've seen how Van Gogh's brushstrokes seem to make the evening sky vibrate, let's see one of his remarkable skies in daylight. How is this daytime sky different from his starry sky? There's warmer colors like the oranges, reds, yellows. There's only one star, which is the sun. How is it similar? The brushstrokes are thick and moving. Do you see any outlines on this composition? Yes, if you look closely at the tree trunks and the sun, you will see an outline, which makes these things stand out. Van Gogh applied his paint thickly, sometimes with a palette knife. When we look at his work of art, we can see thick paint. We can see the brushstrokes he used. Through his thick paint use, we could see all the visible brushstrokes and textures he has in his paintings. If you ever see one in real life, the paint is so thick and shiny and bright. It's really cool to see. Let's take a close-up at this sky. If you could run your hand over your painting, how would it feel? It would feel rough and bumpy. He uses the texture to emphasize or exaggerate the radiance, the brightness of the sun. Van Gogh often painted day and night. To see at night, he would place candles in the brim of his hat, light them, and continue working. Sometimes when the candles were very short, the people of the village would walk by and yell, "Monsieur Van Gogh, your hat will soon be on fire." But Van Gogh would keep right on painting. He would paint for 14 to 16 hours a day. He would spend his money on paint instead of food and would go for days at a time without a decent meal or good night's sleep. This was not healthy for him, and he often needed the attention of a doctor. One doctor who was also in poor health became his friend, and Vincent painted his portrait. Where do we see the most texture in this painting? On his coat and his hair. Why do you suppose the background is painted in a color so much like the foreground figure? I think it's to force your eyes to this man's face. What do his eyes tell you? He appears to be tired. In fact, he was a homeopathic doctor, one who uses herbs, a psychiatrist, and an artist. So he was a very busy man. Gadget played an important part in the last few weeks of Van Gogh's life. Because Van Gogh's illness was never properly diagnosed or treated, he often suffered and was sick. Eventually, he ended up passing away, with his friend by his side. Did Van Gogh's paintings sell well in his lifetime while he was alive? No, sadly they didn't. He only sold a handful of drawings while he was still alive. During his life, there were not many people who recognized the value of Van Gogh's painting. In the 100+ years since Van Gogh died, we've come to understand his ingenious use of color and expressive texture. In your art, you will make your own starry night, spiraling sky.
When you do, think of Vincent van Gogh and how his work with color and texture expanded our ideas and changed the way we see. And instead of using oil paint, we'll be using oil pastel, which is like a stick of oil. We can make it very bright and it's soft, and we're going to try to create movement and texture using short, bright brush strokes. So I hope you guys look forward to your art by Vincent van Gogh.